I'm the director. So I'm just going to keep going. So I'm not going to do any cuts or anything. I'm just going to keep going. Because so it's more of a live thing. Okay, stand by. And roll film. And hi, Mark de Paola here, gazing out at the Hudson River, which is providing this wonderful light on me. I want to thank you for tuning in to this live to digital event in this very trying time. I'm glad this is a session of questions and answers, and I'm glad that no one asked any questions about the current state of affairs, because I am ill-equipped to answer those, although I have my own feelings about it. I hope that all of you are well and continue to be well, and that we can band together as a global unit to combat in our own way, our own participation, to help move forward and continue our lives with some new information that perhaps will give us some perspective. And one that I'm really struck by is the difficulties that are taking place all around the world, but in Italy in particular. It's sort of a second home to me, where family and friends live. And I saw some photographs of dolphin in the canals in Venice, and that was very moving for me, because I, having been there a lot, have never seen to the bottom of the canals, nor have I seen a dolphin in a canal, canals. So in any case, moving on from that, we've asked that people ask questions of me. I always love question and answers, and we offer them typically at the end of talks, and people are often shy, so hopefully this digital virtual distance will make people a little bit more brave. And I have in my breast pocket here the questions. And so without further ado, this is my studio. It's a place where I create every day, including all these days where we are required to change our lifestyle. I'm pursuing many things and shooting constantly, as I always do. Camera always by my side, water bottle. This is not Andrew Stewart's, this is mine, lest you get confused by the fluorescent tape. First question. How do you know you're done with any given project? And this was submitted by a dear, dear friend of mine, Raina. And in the case of Raina, I think it is 50 years. I'll have to check with her and confirm that number. But so at least a project is set to conclude in 50 years from its inception, which is probably like 5, 6, or 7 years ago. So we've got 40 plus years to go on that one. But to answer the question, a project, for me, first of all, a project needs to have a conclusion, or else it's not a project in terms of its validity. You know, some people believe differently, and I encourage everyone to have their own opinion on it. But for me, a project or an art series needs to be completed before it is art for me. Case in point, the 60 Seconds series, which was initiated like about 6 years ago. That series was shot over an 8-month period at my prior studio, mere blocks from here, and that was thus completed at that time after 8 months. And it's been a very successful series, and one that sort of brought me into the art world from the film and still world more in a commercial capacity, although I am a part of all my imagery, so it's all my art, but in terms of formal art and exhibition and books and things. So that was an 8-month project. I have some great stories that don't relate to these questions. Maybe we can do this again and there'll be more questions, but recently I was in Europe which I do a couple times a year and more, following, as I call the Fashion Week or Fashion Month circus, which initiates in New York, and then off to London, and then Milan and Paris. And so during these travels, it was literally like a plot for a movie. Again, I can talk about it another time, but included in that plot was a special project imitation by Armani that for me was going to be the conclusion of my Art of Backstage series, the last time I shot for Art of Backstage. While in the car on the way to the shoot a few Sundays ago, Mr. Armani had canceled his show to all spectators and everybody who is unnecessary for the presentation of the show. So in that was rolled in my project, and so although that was going to be the end of that project, I think we will push that forward at their request the next time it is available and healthy to do so. So that's an indicator of the conclusion of another series. Most of you have seen, or hopefully will see, the Art of Backstage. So yeah, it's sort of instinctual in this case. The Armani thing was completely unexpected. In other cases, it's very specific. So thank you, Raina, for that question. I hope that answers that for you. Next question. Let me see. This is from Robert. With the resurgence of film, do you only use lab for scans or have used your own scanner? This is a good question. I have a couple scanners, and I scan my own film more as proofs, not as finals. So I will have a proper, depending on the format and the destination, I'll have a proper scan done, like a drum scan or a very high-end flatbed, like imitation type scan, that is sort of beyond my expertise. I always like to work along with people who can do things better than I can. I don't want to pretend that I know all things and can do all things. There's not enough time in the day or in my life to be the master of all things. So I focus literally and figuratively, and as Matthew Beaton would say, I would not focus on the things that I'm not best suited for. So yeah, so it's more in the form of a proof sheet in this, so that I can just bring the images up to size for selection or layout or sort of a PDF presentation to those who are not on site. So yeah, that's the thing about scans. Thank you for that, Robert. This is from Pierre. Thank you, Pierre, for this question. It's a good one, and it probably will be an unexpected answer for all of those out there, all of you. If you could take one lens and rig with you into the apocalypse, which one and why? Please and thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Pierre. I am, like I said, probably going to answer in an unexpected way, although not entirely, because it involves a Leica and a 50mm lens, although probably, like I said, not the ones you expect. I would choose what's called the KE7A. It is a camera that was built for a short time, early 70s, maybe for a couple years. Don't know exactly how many were made, but that is a military camera made for the U.S. military to their specs for use in very demanding and difficult circumstances. So it is a very robust camera built internally with additional strength, even further than the camera, the M4 made at that time. So the KE7A is an M4, it's a film camera, and it has one of the best lenses ever made for 35mm that, although people may want to feel differently, but I've tested these lenses. It is for me, very close to the current Apple 50mm Summicron, which is the best lens ever made for the 35mm format. But the 50mm f2 L-cam is a simple 4-element design, again, and weather sealed to a certain degree for the rigors of military use. And I do not own one. I have never owned one. They are quite pricey at this time, but that would be probably just one camera, one lens into any situation, apocalyptic or otherwise. So thank you, Pierre, for that question. Yeah. Okay, here's a cool one. This is by Yolanda. And she asks, I hope you'll be able to help me out on how to use the Leica macro adapter with the Noctilux. I played around with this combo only once and had trouble with focusing and figuring out distance from the subject. How much leeway do you have in terms of distance from the subject? Any tips and tricks would be great to hear. Part of this, Yolanda, you may not want to hear, or certainly some will not want to hear, because it's my answer to things that require proficiency and experience and expertise. This is a good question and a very tricky situation for most people, in that you're dealing with very close distances, very high magnification rates, and working in very close quarter. In my world, in the fashion beauty world, I'm working like right up to someone's face, literally. All the images that I create with the macro adapter, I think it's called macro adapter M, are created without any cropping. So any image that you see in the macro mode is only created without any cropping, and is the case with all my imagery. No post-production, no manipulation, no anything. So that adds further complexity and experiential needs to the use of that adapter. So you're working basically, there is in the adapter itself, which is placed between the camera body and the rear lens of the choice, of your choice, has a focusing helical in it, which changes the focus only very slightly, and retains the normal, not theory, but the fact that when you focus, the lens elements are made further away from the sensor or the film plane. So there's a little bit of leeway in the adapter itself, and you do have focusability on the lens itself, but all confined within very small parameters. So it really is experiencing and practicing. In car racing, they call it seat time. You just have to use it a lot and see what you get. I do not use a tripod. Most people in macro work do use a tripod. I do not use a tripod, and that's consistent with the way I work. I like results that are looser, that are more organic, and don't have, like in the case of most macro work, this telltale, shooting at f/16, 22 or further on view cameras, so that you can get a lot of depth of field, because there is so little depth of field inherent in a macro shot. I let it go and do what it will, and my clients and admirers of that work of mine, the macro work, love it because it has more of an organic feel. So play with focus on the lens, and play with focus on the macro adapter separately and combined, so that you can see. And if you go to my Instagram, at dePaolaPictures.com, you'll see some macro work in there, and those are examples of it, which I'm sure you have, which is probably why you asked the question of me. Play with it, have fun with it, and just using yourself as a tripod, just moving in and out, and so you won't have to be fumbling around with the tripod, at least at first, if you want to do a looser rendition to the images. And play with it and let me know. Send send us some photographs, the results, so we can see and maybe continue this dialogue. So thank you very much, Yolanda. Very cool. I love the macro adapter. It opens up a whole new world, obviously, and a great thing to do during this time where we have reduced mobility. So, David asks, what was your first camera, paid shoot, and nude shoot? First camera. I would have to probably say, although my father was a photographer, I would think, I understand, or I recollect that my first camera was one of these folding type camera, like Kodak cameras that maybe used 620 film or 120. I was just a little boy. I don't think I ever shot with it. I still have it in storage in Los Angeles someplace. But I think that's probably my first one. Yeah, they were just omnipresent at that time. That was sort of what the pocket camera at the time. Yeah, that was the first camera. First paid shoot. I would have to say that a lot of people who come to my workshops have heard this story, but my very first job photographically was, although I had been shooting since I was about 10 years old, 10, 12 years old, when I had decided to become a photographer, my sister, Alessia, I hope you're out there watching this, Alessia had shown me some proof sheets, a couple proof sheets of headshots that she had done before she was pursuing being an actress at that time, before going on to being a world prominent doctor. And I looked at them and I said, well, who shot these? Oh, the best headshot photographer in Los Angeles shot these. And I said, well, really? How much did you pay for these? And she said, $200. And mind you, this was a long time ago. And I said, well, Leslie, these are terrible. Like this is the best headshot photographer in Los Angeles. And she was, she's amazing. I said, okay, well, these are not good. And she was disappointed, but I thought to myself, wow, if I can shoot 2 rolls of film, she said it took about an hour to do, and I can make $200, I'm gonna do this, at least on the side. I was still in school and college. And so I went to a entertainment magazine office on Hollywood Boulevard to put in my one little column-inch ad, Mark de Paola photography, and my phone number, which I did. So I walk in the office and there's a receptionist, and I have to wait a minute till she gets off the phone, and through a door just off to one side of the reception desk, there's this woman. She keeps on looking at me, and I'm looking behind me going, trying to figure out who she's looking at. Diminutive gal, an older woman, and then these piles of magazines and papers and things. And she keeps on staring at me, and once the receptionist frees up, I give her my information, and then the woman in the office waves me in. And I again look behind me, like she must be motioning to someone else, and waves me in, and I walk in, and she says, you good? I said, excuse me? Are you good? I said, I don't really know what you're getting at, but I'm gonna say, yes, I'm good. So you're good? Yes, I'm good. You're really good. I'm really good. Great. You have a studio? Yes, of course, which I didn't. And she said, you know Henry Fonda? So, of course I know Henry Fonda. Who doesn't know Henry Fonda? And she said, well, I want you to photograph Henry Fonda for the cover of my magazine. You can do that. I said, absolutely. So I did, and I had to scramble to find a studio that was gonna be mine for the day, and Mr. Fonda and the entourage were there, and management, and publicity, and this and that. And that story is an important one because people like to know how you got started. I had my first assignment was to photograph Henry Fonda for the cover of a magazine without the publication seeing one single image of mine, not one. She just asked me if I was good. So therein lies how individual this journey can be. I don't know that anybody has done that before or since. maybe they have, but certainly I'm not aware of it. So that's how individual the journey, as I talk about a lot, about individuality. So I was paid something, David. I don't know how much. I'm sure it was very little, maybe a couple $100, or I really don't remember. But I think that was my first paid shoot, and I didn't show one image, and here we are, decades later. And then what was my first nude shoot? That's a difficult one too, I think, to pinpoint, but let's say that aside from more personal shoots that might have involved someone, a girlfriend or someone I lived with, you know, on the personal side, there was a gal in LA who I met, and her name was Gina, and I believe that was my first nude shoot, and we had gone to a friend of my family's house in West Los Angeles, someplace, a beautiful home with a pool and a beautiful bathroom, and I recollect that being my first nude shoot. So thank you for that three-part question, David. Okay. Philip asks me, how do you expose properly, what developer, what temperature, and time? Exposing properly is like everything, you know, it comes with your imparting your own sensibilities to it, because a proper exposure can be what, you know, Ansel Adams, you know, set out to formulate as, you know, middle gray, 18% reflectance, and that gives you a proper exposure, and then you can expand or contract through what he called and developed as the zone system between most faint detail in the blacks to the last detail in the highlights, and you can change this exposure curve, exposure range. So this you know, correct is very elusive, but let's say that there is a correct. The way you arrive at it is to experiment. So you take a subject in any conditions and do what I call the ring round exposure test, where you do what, say, the meter says is correct, and then expose in half-stop increments 3 stops over what is considered normal, or 18% gray, and 2 stops under by half-stop increments. And in this way, then you compare them side by side, and you determine what's correct. So it may not be, since I work, you know, always in the fleshes, you know, placement of accurate flesh, and then being able to properly, you know, include in that scene, say, some jewelry or a dark outfit that has a shimmer to it, or not, a matte velvet or a shiny white outfit. You know, all these things have to be considered in the eventual destination for the image creation, and also destination. So, so the correct has to be for you. For me, you know, an average Caucasian skin is in zone 6, so it reflects twice as much light as middle gray, which is 18% reflectance, so 35% reflectance gives me a ballpark, and I can just eyeball where I think that should be relative to clothing, jewelry, hair, setting, all these things. So experiment and do an exposure test. You can do it digitally, you can do it filmically, and then it will determine for you what is most pleasing. And then what developer? For film developer, for me, I've been a Tri-X guy because I've been doing this a really long time. And so I shoot Tri-X, and I expose it at half of what it has indicated is the ASA or ISO. So for Tri-X it's 400, and for Tri-X Professional it's 320. So it's either 200 or 160 is the way I put it on the meter. And then I process in D76 1:1, which basically is 10 minutes at 68 degrees. So that gives you developer temperature and time. Yeah, so 10 minutes, 68 degrees, D76, dilution 1:1 for Tri-X. And then there are so many different dilutions, developing agents, time agitation cycles. I agitate, obviously when I process myself, about 15 seconds every minute with tap tap to dislodge any bubbles. And yeah, so there you have it. And I do it all the time. I shoot film, you know, not daily, but close to daily, and I process the negative here in the studio or wherever I am when I can. Yeah, but keep playing with it. I play with it all the time. Sometimes I give a little bit more aggressive agitation, or a little bit more time or less time, depending on what I had shot. Like it's not an exact science, but consistency is rewarded. In order to make modifications to something, one must achieve a consistent approach, so the deviations are then also consistent and repeatable. Very important. Yeah. So, I'm not going to even say whose name this is, but is Mark Mann as awful as he seems? Yes, he is that awful. He is awful at not being a wonderful father, and he is awful at not being a wonderful partner, and he is awful at not telling the truth, and he is awful at not having integrity, and he is awful at not being a friend, and he is awful at not being talented, a genius, a person who he's awful at his own, creations not being good. He is awful at not being one of the true gems I have met in this business or otherwise, although I don't know him for that long. His awful lack of, I'm getting confused, but he's awful, yes. And I'm really blessed to have that person, and you folks are too, because truth is really hard to come by, and he's just awfully not good at not telling the truth. So yeah, he's awful. Yeah. Thank you for your question. So John, share the details of the 60 seconds images, specifically camera, lens, and settings. Yeah, already in the question, you've answered one question. All images in the 60-second series were exposed for 60 seconds. Handheld images that came about in the middle of the night in my prior studio with just ambient light coming in the window. It was on the 8th floor, there was no obstruction, so it would just be whatever the ambience was, and no direct light from the street lamp or anything. So ambient light coming in the studio windows in the middle of the night, so I only had threshold detail. I was not employing the cones. I could see no chroma, only faint black and white. I could barely see anything at all, and picked up a camera, and an M camera, and it was, I pushed the button and it was blinking 60, and I didn't know what that was. And so I just held my breath, held myself steady, and exposed 60 seconds, and then it buffered for 60 seconds after that, which seemed like a year. And so all the images were exposed for 60 seconds, and all of them were shot with either the Noctilux, the 50 Noctilux at f1, I always shoot at f1, or the Summilux, 35 Summilux 1.4, all Summilux are, or most of them are, at 1.4, 35 millimeter, again for 60 seconds. So those two lenses, most of the Noctilux, but on occasion, the Summilux, it just happened to be on the camera at the time I wanted to shoot. And I don't know if I mentioned it when we were talking about when is a series done, but yes, I did. So that was over a period of 8 months, and then put the camera down for that series. I never focused. Again, I couldn't see to really even focus. I know it probably seems hard to understand that you can take pictures without seeing the image, but that's or the subject. That's a whole nother exploration that's wonderful, and I play around with a lot. So it was basically, I would usually just rack focus to, far right on Leica lenses, that's minimum focus. And so basically like 3 feet around there, and I was between maybe 3 and 5 feet away and didn't really care about focus. For God's sakes, I was exposing for 60 seconds. So some of them are remarkably in focus, it's strange, apparent focus, obviously. But yeah, so the settings are 60 seconds, the lens 35 or 50, wide open, and minimum focusing. And thank you for the question. Great one from Tracy. How do you make a safe, creative environment for the nude models? Starting off, to me, they're not new models. And I don't mean this in any bad way. It's a great way to refer to them, nude subjects, but not nude models. Although many fall into art collaborations, but they're just humans first and foremost for me. And I think it breaks down to very much a lack of judgment. I make a safe and creative environment because I don't judge. And so they feel, as I've been told, that they are involved in the process, collaborators, partners in this, because I don't tell typically people, whether I'm shooting fashion, that involves clothes, or nudes, I don't tell people what to do. I allow them to be who they are, and even sometimes working with someone for the first time, I won't say anything. I just let them sort of stand there until they're left to their own devices, and when they realize I continue to not tell them what to do, it's sort of an implicit, I guess, or just sort of a feeling that they can just be relaxed and be themselves. So that's and always safe for me, obviously, because I'm not looking for images that are unsafe. I don't want to tell people what to do or how to do it. What I want is an exchange of who the subject is. That's what I pursue. So I think that translates just to a feeling of, and people have expressed it in many different ways, but I think it translates to a feeling of being safe and free and in an environment where they can express themselves. So I think that is pretty much how that works, Tracy. So thank you for that question. It's a good one, and it's asked all the time because it's really daunting. We do some workshops that we call Nude in the Landscape with Leica camera, Leica Academy. And people are often encountering this for the first time in their life, and they're often scared to death and shaking, and because it's such an environment that's replete with all sorts of energy, very individual. And so we work through that with working with very professional models, subjects, and also who present an environment that's not intimidating also. So it's not intimidating for the photographer or for the talent. And so creating an environment without judgment is really what it is, and a real appreciation for individuality and communication between the subject and me. Thank you. Oh, here's a great one too. This is from Vera. Do you find any differences between photographing women versus men for fashion or non-fashion? Great question. I am known for photographing women in the fashion, beauty, and art, portraiture sectors. And this has been from the beginning. That's just my own sort of propensity, or where my interests lie in sort of that communication. And I think really understanding other people is a challenge, and so I think I was challenged by that in the beginning, which leads to my way of working. But no, I don't shoot any differently at all, men or women. But because I started as a photographer of women's fashions and cosmetics and hair products and such, jewelry, one gets typecast. Not always, because sometimes people are able to shoot both in the beginning. But I've been always known as a photographer, not a photographer of women, but where women are the subjects. I have done a lot of shooting of men, whether it's in television commercials, which has been my primary career, in the fashion beauty sector as well. So, you know, shot a lot of men as well. But what happens is you get typecast. And so they just don't let you do it. They hire you for one thing because they see that's what you do. And so in the film business, which is also true in the commercial, television commercial film business, they're one of the most prominent, I won't say her name, but prominent indie producers in the modern history of motion pictures. She said, if you want to make, you want to make films that are men, you know, testosterone films, you need to be able to hang in that environment. You know, drink till 4 o'clock in the morning, sometimes the case, and then see dailies at 7 and hit the set again. And then there was, and then there are, of course, the estrogen director. So, you know, with very specific needs to be able to, you know, present the female stars in a light that is flattering and allows them to do their best work without thinking about what they look like. So there are very specific differences in testosterone directors or estrogen directors, and they tend to want to keep it separated, or they see you that way and they don't think that you can do it that way. And there's a lot of discussion. I can't remember if it was Ridley Scott or Tony Scott. One of the Scott brothers directed Thelma and Louise, and had some difficulty at first in getting that passed by some of the brass at the studio, because he was known for, you know, directing men, you know, and this was a female, you know, road trip journey film. And so he ended up doing a brilliant job, but there was resistance at the beginning. So I use that example for that. But no, I still have interest. It's still the same for men and women to know who they really are, and I put them in a situation where they are allowed to express themselves without judgment. And so I would often get commentary on my work that I did for men, or not for men, involving men, men's fashions, or a portrait. They would say, wow, it's so natural, it's just like you shoot the women, and you know, but they're men. And I said, well, they're just humans. You know what I mean? And so my approach is exactly the same, although my opportunity has not been equal. So thank you, Vera, for that question. That's great. Tebow. Okay, here's Tebow's question. There are rumors that the Leica Q3 could use detachable M lenses. I don't know where these rumors are. One, because I'm not interested in the rumors. I find it much more, you know, sort of difficult to know things before they happen than to not know. So while I've had some opportunity to know things, I tend to, you know, cover my ears and make noises so that I don't hear things any longer. It's of no value to me to know things beforehand. So I thought it was fun in the beginning, but it's no value to me. So I don't want to know these things. So not aware of these rumors. The Q3 detachable M lenses. The one thing I can say is this: one, the M lenses don't have autofocus, so you know that. One of the benefits of the Q series is it has, you know, brilliant autofocus, and you can sort of take that element out of you know, candid work or street work. I mean, it's brilliant. Yes, you can put a 28mm on an M camera, but it's not going to focus for you. And then there are considerations. If you, I have not done this, but if you consider the flange focal distance of the M camera and also the Q camera, see if that matches, or else they would have to do some major modifications. So maybe they can do M element design, or using, you know, optical design that are the same as some of the M lenses in a housing that will accommodate with the motors for autofocus. I really don't know, but so yeah, so throat opening of the lens mount, flange focal distance. Those two things will give you an idea whether it's feasible or not, or if people are just talking stuff. Although the rumor mill is often pretty accurate, I guess. So I've been told. I don't know how that works, but yeah, so that remains to be seen. Don't know, but thanks for the question. Okay. These are good questions. David, are fashion shows a thing of the past in a post-pandemic world? In a certain sense, I think fashion shows have been a thing of the past before the pandemic that we're now living in, and I've experienced it really succinctly with the Armani. If you're tuning in now with the Armani sort of postponement of my project with them when they canceled the show just recently in Milan, and I could spend a long time on this. Maybe we can do that in person, sometime in the near future. But the whole business has changed. Fashion shows were initiated for the buyers. So a designer would design a line and do a preview to the buyers and the editorial, the publications, the magazine publications, so that they could prepare for a couple month delay in exposing those new designs, and also where the stores could make their orders beforehand, so they can, once the designs were exposed to the public, then they would be available in the store. So it was an internal function, and glamorized in like funny face, and and now much more so it's a sort of a celebrity first row thing. So you have people like well, I won't mention names, but there are people in the front row who are sort of driving marketing these days, the influencers who have hopefully a specific and correct demographic penetration in their own social media platform. So it's largely that, and then that reciprocates back to the designers for designing and presenting to those people, as opposed to the magazine and to the buyers, who they still need to expose to, but in a very different platform. So in the form of the fashion show, it's already not been the fashion show of the past. And the extreme example is, if you can't be in proximity to someone else safely, then no, of course there won't be fashion shows, except for those that are recorded or live filmed, so that they can disseminate that information. So many changes, but for me it's been not the same for a while, having been in this business for a long time. But it's a great idea. I think optimistically, I hope that people are able to get back together again and not completely be lost to proximity and human interaction that way. So I suspect when things are solved and evolved here, we will get back together again. That's certainly my hope. So thank you for that. Jeff, what's your favorite aspect ratio? 35 millimeter, 6x4.5, 6x7, or 6x6? That, again, having been in this business for so long, is a difficult one to answer. There's not one that works for all circumstances. I'm a huge fan of 35 millimeter, so I started on 8x10 actually, but 35 millimeter is the format I've used most, and so my work is sort of predicated on that format. Although there was a time when I was doing a lot of say catalog work, editorial work, where the formats had to be very specifically utilized before the image was taken. So 6x6, the square, was a larger format, than 35 millimeter, and then we could put these little cardboard, format templates over the image, so we could see where the cropping was, where the title of the magazine was, and where the type went, and these things. So it was a way to have more room than was necessary. It wasn't a crop in either horizontal or vertical, and so you could utilize it as you wish. So it was a very versatile, and I love the images from it that were not cropped. Irving Penn, Richard Avedon, these wonderful portraits that are in those, shot with the Rolly twin lens, that are the square format, David Bailey, and as I said, Pan and Avedon. So, and of course, and that would encompass the 645 and the 67. The 6.6 would pretty much, on a good camera with good optics, would accommodate those other sizes as well, though slightly larger, but maybe diminished in resolution and contrast. So 35 millimeter 6x6 and 45 and 8x10, which are the same format but larger. Of course, the 8x10 is 4 times larger than the 4x5. So thank you, Jeff, for your question. That's pretty cool. I shoot them all the time, so they're all good. Last two, Ian. Figures. You would ask these two. So, first question from Ian. Is art an imitation of reality? If so, is it inherently attempting to justify itself? This is sort of a lifelong study and partially a very intellectual study and a scientific study and a psychological study, and I involve myself in all those factors in the creation of my art and my images. So first off, art has been considered to be an imitation of reality in sort of realistic painting and other sort of figurative art styles. It would be presumed to be a rendering of something that was there, and so that being a certain truth. Not so, because artists often create from their memory, from their mind. Some create from a photograph or sitting in front of a tree and drawing it and painting it. So there's lots of ways to create art, obviously, but what I'm going to say is there is no one reality. And this is where it gets really complex, and this is the sort of the focus of my studies the last several years. No two people are alike. DNA and experience, nature, nurture, bottom-up, top-down psychology. So a combination between neurobiology as it relates to human vision and that with cognitive psychology, these things set out to explain and do explain because medical science has advanced so much in being able to determine how the brain actually works in a sort of binary mode where it's certain neurons are being triggered or not. There is no one reality. So if there's no one reality, because everyone is different and everyone perceives things differently as a result of their, as I said, DNA, how much color spectrum accuracy they have in their vision, emotional connection to color or settings or trees or things. These are things. So there is no one reality. There's a great portion of a documentary I saw recently on Diana Vreeland, and she used the word faction. And when I have this correct, if not, then please correct me, but when she became, I guess, creative director of maybe the fashion, the wardrobe, the fashion archives at the Met Museum here in New York, she was criticized by some, or one, or I don't remember exactly, about her lack of formal training in the arts as an intellectual study, and somehow the word faction was used in the description of her sort of position. And I love it because one person's fact is another person's fiction, and so thus faction, which I just love. So so there is no real reality, and there can be an imitation for that person, let's say, but everybody interprets things differently. And then taking that further in the reductionist, pursuit of understanding art or science or mathematics, or if reducing things down to their simplest form, then it allows in art for people to be able to involve their own sensibilities. So if you don't give tangible information, we as humans are able to then engage more on a personal level rather than something that is imitative or an apparent reality. So my answer is there is no real reality in the first place. But and then you said, if so, is it inherently attempting to justify itself? I think at certain times, yes. When Impressionism became more prevalent, or a style, it was criticized as being sort of blasphemy, in the extreme senses. But brilliantly, the Impressionist painters would use a lack of information, sort of a reductionist construction of an image, so that you couldn't even employ stereopsis, which gives you the ability to see whether something is 2 or 3 dimensional, and it appears more three-dimensional because we can't have the information that tells us it's not three-dimensional. It's brilliant. So and those the people prior, in the era prior, I'm not a art historian, but were more literal, and so it's maybe in that sort of nexus time that there maybe a justification. Well, this is more real, and this is less valid because it's not. So huge discussion, but thank you for that question. This is another part of your question. This goes even further, deeper. In other words, are we as humans assuming images are truth? Like I said, yes, we can perceive them as truth. In my estimation, they are not. By the very nature of them, we assume that a photograph was taken at a specific time in reality, which therefore creates a truth to it. Time, and I don't know about reality or the reality of time, but for me, let's say that there's a timestamp and it did take place at that time, and then there's the sort of changing of time, theory of relativity. So there's all those discussions which are way beyond my capabilities to discuss, but which sort of taken at a specific time, which therefore creates a truth to it. Some form of truth, perhaps. Ultimate truth, no. And this goes on. Well, now because of Photoshop, vector imaging, simulations, ray tracing, and 3D computations, we can create false realities. How do these other realities hold value in the art world? Do they think they have merit? This, I choose not to go too deeply into it, because this is what I am, I'm saying that ultimately you cannot fool humans. In other words, you can get, something can look like something, but not engage humans in the way that we are designed to engage. So, well, yes, with computational and vector imaging and computer modeling, we can create something that is very close, but in my estimation, not ultimately successful in engaging human emotions, which is most important to me, is presenting an image that engages people. So that concludes the questions for today. As I said at the head of this, it's always fun for me I always look forward to getting questions, and I don't often get that many because I think people are shy. So thank you for not being shy and presenting these great questions, and spending a little time away from what's going on in the world at this time. So be well, be safe, and I'm here. Let's continue the dialogue, and hope to see you very soon over coffee, which is normally the way I do things. Love you guys. Signing off for now.